meets to receive testimony on the budget posture of the Department of Defense in the fiscal year's 2019 request and the future year's defense program. We welcome our witnesses, Secretary of Defense Mattis, Undersecretary Norquist, and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Dunford. Secretary Mattis, we wish to commend you for your work in developing a strategy that correctly prioritizes the current threats that we face. Now comes the more difficult task, that's implementing the strategy. We agree on the strategy, but it's got to be implemented. One of Chairman McCain's priorities has been considering if the department is properly structured to take on this huge task. And as the committee looks toward the upcoming NDAA process, we welcome your thoughts about what we can do to help you. In the end, we must recognize that even if we get strategy and structure exactly right, you cannot successfully if Congress does not deliver in the resources needed to implement this strategy. We know how damaging that can be and has been, as we have time and again failed to do our job by passing appropriations bills, instead passing CR after CR. We welcome your testimony about exactly how this would affect it. In fact, that'll be one of my first questions as to what would happen if we hadn't done this, and what will happen if we don't do it again for 2020 and ensuing years. This is especially important because we are not yet out of the woods on sequestration, although we did come to a budget agreement for this year and the next. We still have to go back and try to take care of the problems that will be in 2020 and ensuing years after that. We cannot dig ourselves out of the current readiness crisis in just 2 years. It'll take much longer to undo the damage that has been done in the past 8 years to our military, and the lack of any real growth in the future years defense program exemplifies this. So we look forward to your testimony, and thank you for being here and for the great job that you continue to do year after year. Senator Reed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I want to join you in welcoming the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of Joint Chiefs Staff, and the comptroller. Thank you, gentlemen, for your service to the nation over many, many years, your continued service. Today, we are considering the fiscal year 2019 budget for the Department of Defense, which seeks $617 billion in base funding and $69 billion for overseas contingency operations. Fortunately, we find ourselves in a moment of budget stability, having passed an agreement in February that removed the threat of sequestration for fiscal years 2018 and 2019 and added funding for both defense and non-defense programs. However, additional challenges loom on the horizon as the caps and sequestration will be back in force for fiscal year 2020. As the Chairman mentioned, we still have to focus on that issue. Secretary Mattis, I commend you for the careful and thoughtful and hard work that went into the National Defense Strategy, or NDS. It accurately recognizes that the central challenge facing our nation is the reemergence of long-term strategic competition with Russia and China. I'm also pleased to see that the present budget reflects the beginnings of investment in some of the technologies we will need for this competition, such as hypersonics and artificial intelligence. However, the perennial challenge facing any Secretary of Defense is preparing for the future while reacting to the present. And unfortunately, there are many urgent situations not delineated in the NDS that will require our attention in the coming weeks and months. At the present time, the White House is attempting to focus its efforts on negotiating an agreement to denuclearize North Korea. Given where we were a few months ago when the administration was threatening limited strikes on North Korea, I am relieved to say we have come a long way, but we still have a long, hard road ahead. We all hope that President Trump's summit with the North Korean leader presents us with an opportunity to craft a comprehensive negotiated settlement. However, we must recognize that if the negotiations fail, and if that happens, we could find ourselves in a more challenging position than before the negotiations, with a renewal of dangerous rhetoric about war with North Korea, but now more supercharged by those advocating for military action, claiming that diplomacy has failed. While working through these issues with a depleted diplomatic corps, the President must also decide by May 12th whether to continue to waive nuclear-related sanctions on Iran as required by the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA. I support preserving the JCPOA. The United States and the world is safer with it. By all accounts, the JCPOA is working as intended, and Iran is verifiably meeting its commitments under the deal. If not for this agreement, Iran would likely be a nuclear power today, and withdrawing from it could accelerate Iran's path to nuclear weapons and make America less safe. Furthermore, withdrawing from the deal could be a devastating blow to our efforts at diplomacy with North Korea, and for that matter, any further diplomatic efforts to contain aggressive or destabilizing behavior by our adversaries. Why would any nation engage with us in serious dialogue to resolve differences if they fear we will later withdraw unilaterally and without cause? Furthermore, abandoning the JCPOA would isolate the United States diplomatically from the international community at the very time we need worldwide cooperation to address the threat posed by North Korea. Additionally, President Trump's mixed messages about a military commitment to Syria could accelerate the declared intentions of Israel to conduct more sustained attacks against Iranian forces and proxies in Syria and Lebanon. The level of violence and Iran's reaction are unlikely to be restricted to Syria, and a confrontation, including Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and others in the region, is a real risk. If any of these situations becomes a crisis, it's going to take all the attention and resources of the Department of Defense. So I am interested in hearing more about how you plan to balance the present and the future. Turning back to the NDS, when we think about great power competition, we tend to think and plan for conventional conflict. But I believe we must take into account that much of the threat already posed by China and Russia is asymmetric. The growing Russian asymmetric threat below the level of military conflict continues to target the United States, our allies, and partners. Russia attacked the heart of our democracy in the 2016 presidential election through a Kremlin-directed hybrid warfare campaign using all tools of national power. Because we have failed to impose sufficient costs for this assault, not only has Russia not been deterred, it has been emboldened, and we are already seeing Russian attempts to interfere at the 2018 midterm elections. I'm interested in hearing what is being done to harden our defenses and develop a whole-of-government approach that utilizes both the military and non-military tools in our arsenal to counter this Russian aggression. We should also keep in mind that by next spring, the Congress will be debating whether to raise sequestration caps once again, as the Chairman mentioned. I have learned from my time in Congress that if you show me your budget, I will tell you your strategy. But what will happen to the NDS if we return to the Budget Control Act caps? This debate will be colored by concern about the debt, which was made worse by the $1.5 trillion debt finance tax cuts passed last year. In CBO's recent projection, debt held by the public rises from 78% of GDP, or $16 trillion at the end of 2018, to 96% of GDP, or $29 trillion by 2028. That percentage would be the largest since 1946 and well more than twice the average over the past 5 decades. The growing deficit and impending sequestration will have severe consequences. They will constitute a major distraction from thoughtful debate and responsible action on issues of national security. They will likely lead to stopgap measures like recurring continuing resolutions that disrupt planning at DoD and every other federal agency, and ironically add cost and inhibit readiness and modernization. If our nation's fiscal strategy does not take into consideration the need for revenue, deficit-driven measures like these will likely make it exceedingly difficult to follow through with a long-term strategy with regard to any serious challenge facing us from the international arena. Secretary Mattis, General Dunford, you've been consummate professionals. You've served in tumultuous times. We face many difficult decisions ahead. We're all gratified and indeed grateful that you are where you are. I look forward to working with you and all of my colleagues in a bipartisan fashion to help you and help us all resolve these issues. Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you, Senator Reid. And for our panel, we'll have all of your statement will be part of the record, but you're recognized for your opening statement, General Dunford. Let's start with Secretary Mattis.
Well, Senator Inhofe, Ranking Member Reid, and distinguished members of the committee, I appreciate this opportunity to testify in support of the President's budget request for fiscal year 2019. And John Dunford and I are joined by Mr. David Norquist, the Department's Comptroller and Chief Financial Officer. And thank you for accepting my written statement. For the record, Chairman, I'm now in my second year as Secretary of Defense, and with your help, we have made steady progress during the past 14 months. I must note today's absence of Chairman McCain, a long-standing, respected, even revered member of this committee and one whose influence is deeply felt and echoed in our national defense strategy. In January, the Department published that strategy, the first in a decade. Framed within President Trump's national security strategy, the 2018 National Defense Strategy provides clear direction for America's military to restore its competitive edge in an era of re-emerging long-term great power competition. The Department next released the 2018 Nuclear Posture Review, which calls for America's military to provide a safe, secure, and effective nuclear deterrent that is modern, robust, flexible, resilient, ready, and appropriately tailored to deter 21st century threats and reassure our allies. In South Asia and Afghanistan, uncertainty in the region has been replaced by the certainty of the administration's South Asia strategy. Concurrently, in the Middle East, we have dramatically reduced ISIS' physical caliphate using a coordinated whole-of-government approach that works by, with, and through our allies and partners to crush ISIS' claim of invincibility and to deny them a geographic haven from which to plot murder. Last month, thanks to the bipartisan support and political courage of Congress and the dedication of this committee, President Trump signed the omnibus spending bill that funds the government for the remainder of this fiscal year. This law, along with a 2-year budget agreement passed as part of February's Bipartisan Budget Act, finally freed us from the inefficient and damaging continuing resolution funding process, now providing the predictable and sufficient funding needed to continue implementing the 2018 National Defense Strategy. Our fiscal year 2019 budget requests the resources necessary to fulfill the Department's enduring mission to provide the combat-credible military forces needed to deter war and, if deterrence fails, to win in any conflict. These forces reinforce America's traditional tools of diplomacy, ensuring that the President and our diplomats negotiate from a position of strength. To restore our nation's competitive military edge, the FY19 budget funds our National Defense Strategy's 3 overarching lines of effort. First, to build a more lethal force. Second, to strengthen our traditional alliances while building new partnerships. And to third, reform the Department's business practices for performance and affordability. Our first line of effort is to build a more lethal force. All our Department's policies, expenditures, and training must contribute to the lethality of our military. We cannot expect success fighting tomorrow's conflicts with yesterday's thinking, yesterday's weapons, or yesterday's equipment. As President Washington said during his first State of the Union address, to be prepared for war is one of the most effectual means of preserving peace. And today, our lethal military arm will enhance our diplomats' persuasiveness. The paradox of war is that an adversary will move against any perceived weakness, so we cannot adopt a single preclusive form of warfare. We must be able to fight across the entire spectrum of combat. The nation must field sufficient capable forces to deter conflict, and if deterrence fails, we must win. Following this logic, we must maintain a credible nuclear deterrent so these weapons are never used, and a decisive conventional force that includes irregular warfare capability. Preserving the full range of our nation's deterrent options requires the recapitalization of our Cold War legacy nuclear deterrent forces as initiated during the previous administration. Modernizing the nation's nuclear deterrent delivery systems and our nuclear command and control is the Department's top priority, and these programs are fully funded in the FY 2019 budget. The 2019 budget further funds enhancements to the U.S. missile defense capabilities to defend the homeland, our deployed forces, allies, and partners against an increasingly complex missile threat. In accordance with the soon-to-be-released 2018 Missile Defense Review, this budget requests continued robust support for missile defense capacity and capability to keep pace with advancing threats. The proposed budget will modestly increase the end strength for the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps to restore readiness, adding 25,900 to the active and reserve force. The budget will also continue to invest in the military's most important asset, its warfighters, with the 2.6% military pay increase. The 2019 budget continues increased procurement of preferred and advanced munitions, a necessity due to the ongoing operations in the Middle East and the need for war reserves. 10 combat ships and 8 support ships are funded, arresting the downward trajectory of our nation's size and of our Navy's size and lethality. We will continue production of 77 F-35s and 24 F-18s, evaluating the performance of both to determine the most appropriate mix moving forward. This budget requests funds for systems to enhance communications and resiliency in space, addressing overhead persistent infrared capabilities, positioning, navigation, and timing, plus space launch systems. Our 2018 National Defense Strategy also prioritized investing in technological innovation to increase lethality, and that continues in this budget. Cyber, advanced computing, big data analytics, artificial intelligence, autonomy, robotics, miniaturization, additive manufacturing, directed energy, and hypersonics are the very technologies we need to fight and win wars of the future. Every investment in the strategy-driven FY 2019 budget is designed to contribute to the lethality of our military, ensuring that subsequent Secretaries of Defense inherit a military force that is fit for its time. Those seeking to threaten America's experiment in democracy should know, if you challenge us, it will be your longest and worst day. Our 2018 National Defense Strategy's second line of effort is continued this year to strengthen our traditional alliances while building new partnerships. In the past, I had the privilege of fighting many times in defense of the United States, but I never fought in a solely American formation. It was always alongside foreign troops. Easier said than done. Winston Churchill noted the only thing harder than fighting with allies is fighting without them. History proves that we are stronger when we stand united with others. Accordingly, our military will be designed, trained, and ready to fight alongside allies. Working by, with, and through allies and partners who carry their fair share remains a source of strength for the United States. Since the costly victory in World War II, Americans have carried a disproportionate share of the global defense burden while others recovered. Today, the growing economic strength of allies and partners has enabled them to step up, as demonstrated by the 74 nations and international organizations participating in the Defeat ISIS campaign, and again in the 41 nations standing shoulder to shoulder in NATO's Resolute Support mission in Afghanistan. This year, every NATO ally has increased defense spending, and 15 NATO allies are increasing their defense budget as a share of the gross domestic product, giving credence to the value of democracies standing together. Further, our Pacific partners are also strengthening their defenses. Our third line of effort is the urgent reform of the Department's business practices to provide both solvency and security. We will continue to establish a culture of performance where results and accountability matter on every expenditure to gain full benefit from every single taxpayer dollar spent on defense. We are committed to exercising the utmost degree of financial stewardship and budget discipline within the Department. In this regard, this year we will deliver our Department's first full financial audit in history. We will find the problems it reveals and take swift action to correct our deficiencies, thereby earning the trust of Congress and the American people. I am confident we have the right leaders in place to make meaningful reform a reality. Pat Shanahan as Deputy Secretary of Defense, Jay Gibson as Chief Management Officer, Ellen Lord as Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition Sustainment, Michael Griffin as Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering, Bob Daigle as Director of Cost Assessment and Program Evaluation, and David Norquist, who joins us here today as the Department's Chief Financial Officer. Each brings the intellect, the energy, and experience required to implement and sustain meaningful reform, ensuring the Department provides performance and affordability for the American taxpayer. The Department is transitioning to a culture of performance and affordability that operates at the speed of relevance. We will prioritize speed of delivery, continuous adaptation, and frequent modular upgrades. With your continued critical support, we will shed outdated management and acquisition processes while adopting American industry's best practices. Our management structure and processes are not engraved in stone. They are a means to an end. If current structures inhibit our pursuit of lethality, I have directed service secretaries and agency heads to consolidate, eliminate, or restructure to achieve their mission. Here I will note that I have also issued direction about a particular cancer in our ranks, sexual assault. Unit cohesion built on trust and mutual respect is what holds us together under stress and keeps our forces combat effective against daunting odds. This department is committed to assertively preventing and swiftly responding to any sexual assault in our ranks. While battlefield casualties are a reality of war, we will accept no casualties due to sexual assault in our military family. I personally discussed this with all senior department leaders. Earlier this month, I issued a memo making this clear to all members of the department. I asked that it also be submitted for the record.
Without objection.
The 2019 National Defense Strategy's three primary lines of effort, building a more lethal force, strengthening our alliances, and reforming our business practices, will restore our competitive military advantage, ensuring we are prepared to fight across the full spectrum of combat, both now and in the future. I want to thank this committee for your strong spirit of bipartisan collaboration. While our trajectory is going in the right direction, our work has just begun. This is a year of opportunity and a chance to continue to work together, building on a strong start as we turn the National Defense Strategy into action. The points I need to emphasize in this hearing are that this budget, which is designed to execute the defense strategy, is building a more lethal force, and it is also building for the future by improving our military technological competitive edge. And we will reform the department's business processes to establish that culture of performance and affordability to ensure security and solvency. The strategy is the guidepost for all our actions, including this year's strategy-driven budget request, driving meaningful reform to establish an enduring culture of performance, affordability, and agility. I cannot appear before you without expressing my gratitude to the men and women of our department. They are the ones who must ultimately turn the National Defense Strategy into action. Every day, more than 2 million service members and nearly 1 million civilians do their duty, honoring previous generations of veterans and civil servants who have sacrificed for their country. It's a privilege for me to serve alongside them, and I thank them for their tireless efforts and unyielding standards in defense of our nation. General Dunford is prepared to discuss the military dimensions of the budget.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. An excellent statement. General Dunford.
Senator Inhofe, Ranking Member Reed, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to join Secretary Mattis and Undersecretary Norquist here today. It's an honor to represent your men and women in uniform, and I join the Secretary in acknowledging Senator McCain's leadership and support. Well, we're here for a candid discussion of the challenges we face. I want to begin by assuring you that the U.S. military has a competitive advantage over any potential adversary today. I'm confident we can deter a nuclear attack, defend the homeland, meet our alliance commitments, and prevail in any conflict. But as we previously discussed, after years of sustained operational commitments, budgetary instability, and advances by our adversaries, our competitive advantage has eroded and our readiness has degraded. Driven by the National Defense Strategy in building on the FY17 and 18 appropriations, the 19 budget submission supports rebuilding the lethal and ready joint force that the nation needs. The Secretary has addressed our defense strategy that recognizes Russia and China as the priority, while also meeting the immediate challenges posed by rogue regimes and violent extremist organizations. China and Russia continue to invest across the full range of nuclear, cyber, space, and conventional capabilities. Both states are focused on limiting our ability to project power and undermining the credibility of our alliances. They are also increasingly adept, as Senator Reed has pointed out, at advancing their interests through coercive, competitive activity below the threshold of armed conflict. North Korea has been on a relentless pursuit of nuclear and missile capability, and they've been clear that these capabilities are intended to threaten the United States and our allies in the region. Iran continues to spread malign influence and create instability across the Middle East. And while we've made a great deal of progress over the past year, we are still grappling with the challenges of violent extremism, including ISIS, al-Qaeda, and associated movements. Defending our homeland and our allies and advancing our interests in the context of these and other challenges requires us to maintain a balanced inventory of ready, lethal, and flexible forces that are relevant across the range of military operations. Fortunately, with your support, we've begun to arrest the erosion of our competitive advantage, and we're on a path towards developing the force that we need. This year's budget, again, builds on the readiness recovery that we started in FY17 and accelerates our efforts to develop the capabilities we need for both today and tomorrow. In requesting your support for this year's budget, I, along with all the senior leaders in the department, are making a commitment to you that will make every dollar count. We fully support the auditing initiative led by Secretary Norquist, who's with us here today, and will maintain an ongoing dialogue with you about the return that you are getting on your investment. To restore our competitive advantage and ensure our men and women never find themselves in a fair fight, the U.S. military requires sustained, sufficient, and predictable funding. The funding in this budget is sufficient. I look forward to working with Congress to make sure that it is sustained and predictable in the future. Thank you again for your support and the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you, General Dunford. You have a statement, Secretary Norquist?
I have no prepared statement.
Good. All right. Well, thank you very much. There are some basic questions that are going to be asked, and I'll just go ahead and get those out of the way first. One having to do with the INF. You know, when you get out of Washington and you talk to more normal people, go back home, and the question is, you know, if China is not a signatory to the INF, Russia is, but they violate it. We don't violate it. I'd ask you, Secretary Mattis, do you think that that currently, as it stands, becomes a unilateral limitation on the United States and our capabilities?
Senator Inhofe, it could become a unilateral limitation on us. However, at this point, we are trying to bring Russia back into compliance with the INF. That does not address the entirety of your question, of course, being that there's only 2 countries that have signed this. Part of the reason we are taking some of the steps outlined in the nuclear posture review are to put Russia in a position to see a benefit to themselves to coming back in compliance. We will have to look more broadly at arms control, and I believe that as we modernize the nuclear deterrent, that will put our diplomats in a good position to initiate those discussions with the other countries that are not signatories.
Now, if Russia does not come back, though, as we're hoping that they will, into compliance, what situation would we be in then?
Senator, when nations don't live up to treaties, treaties are not sustainable. We would have to deal with that if we're unsuccessful.
That answers the question. I appreciate that. On end strength, one of the most critical parts of this budget, I'm sure that Secretary Norquist would agree with that. As you point out, fiscal year 18, it's going to be 9,500, then 19, 15,600. And up to 23, up to 56,000. Now, it's already a problem in recruiting, and so I'd like to ask you, either you or the Secretary or General Dunford, are you confident we're going to meet these goals? Because it seems to me like you can only do it through 2 ways, either retention or recruiting. What are your thoughts about meeting these goals? Pretty ambitious.
They are ambitious, Senator, especially in light of the improving U.S. economy, and it's a totally volunteer force. We even call it a totally recruited force. Our recruiters have to be very assertive in getting out there and selling the military. I would tell you right now that the U.S. Army's retention has allowed them to actually lower their recruiting goal for this year because they're retaining more than they anticipated, which is a good sign. So I'm confident without lowering our quality standards that we can maintain this modest increase of troops. I'll pass it over to the chairman for any thoughts he has on that.
Yeah.
Senator Enough, I was going to highlight that I think the Army is a bellwether for all of us, and we just actually had a conversation with the Army this week to talk about their reduction of their recruiting efforts as a result of high retention. But I think at the end of the day, what the Secretary said is what we're all focused on, and that is making sure that we're recruiting and retaining a high-quality force. My judgment is right now, from getting out and visiting the force as well as discussing it with the chiefs, that today we are recruiting and retaining a high-quality force. We don't take that for granted, particularly in a competitive economic environment. But I think the size of the force right now can be sustained with quality people.
And do you agree with those numbers from now through fiscal 23?
I do, Senator, because the focus in the budget this year and last year has been to make sure that the force we have is capable and lethal. And so these numbers that we're increasing really are filling holes to make the units that we have complete.
Okay. Now, lastly, on the budget, the two-year budget we did for fiscal 18 and 19, I have to say it was a lousy budget, and it was one that it was a very difficult thing for me to vote for, and the only reason I did is the same reason that we were here meeting about this morning. So what I'd like to have each of you do, primarily you, General Dunford, what would have happened if we, instead of what we did, if we just went the normal CR route, and since we're going to have to face this in the future, and now's the time to start working for it because we're talking about fiscal year 20 and beyond, what will happen if we are successful in our goals for fiscal years 18 and 19, and we don't have the same opportunities to continue that in fiscal year 20?
Hey, Senator, thanks for that question. One of the things I think we all talk about a lot is our overall competitive advantage. And I think back in 2000, 2001, we could take it for granted that we had a competitive advantage over any potential adversary. And that was particularly in our ability to project power anywhere in the world we needed to advance our interests. What has happened over time is that competitive advantage has eroded. And if we had not had the budget in 17, 18, and 19, and the projections that we have beyond 17 and 18 and 19, I think what really is at risk overall is our competitive advantage over any potential adversary. I think that adversely affects the relationship we have with allies and partners. It adversely affects the deterrence against our potential adversaries, and clearly it would affect our ability to respond in the event that deterrence fails. So, I mean, I think there really is a broader, in addition to the readiness issues and some of the other important issues that we discuss, the overall strategic impact of sequestration and not getting the budget that we had in 17 and 18, I think really is our ability to project power and address all those areas I mentioned: assurance, deterrence, and responsiveness.
So from 20 on, it would be a crisis if we did not.
If we return to the Budget Control Act and sequestration levels, we would not have completed the recovery that we've been on. This, as you pointed out in the beginning, Senator Inhofe, the challenges that we have right now took us 10 or 15 years to develop. It's going to take us more than 2 or 3 years to recover from those challenges.
Understand that. You agree, I assume?
I agree, Senator, 100%. And as the ranking member pointed out, we have future capabilities we must develop now if we're going to carry out our responsibilities to those who sit before this committee in the years ahead. So the dangers we can see growing, and I think that we're going to have to maintain ourselves at the cutting edge of technology, organization, and combat lethality.
I agree, and I think we need to be starting to talk about that now. Senator Reid.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Secretary, in the wake of the annexation of Crimea and the activity in the Ukraine, Congress in the 2015 NDAA prohibited bilateral military cooperation with Russia, which at the time seemed to make perfectly good sense. At this moment, when we're in a very challenging situation in many areas of the world, would it make sense to review those provisions and give you more flexibility in ways in which you could conduct military dialogue with Russia in certain situations?
Yes, Senator Reid, it would, and let me be very specific here. There is no national security waiver to what is referred to as the CATSA Act, the specific act that says that if another nation buys military equipment from Russia, then we will not sell them ours. There are nations in the world who are trying to turn away from formerly Russian sourced weapons and systems like this. We only need to look at India, Vietnam, and some others to recognize that eventually we're going to paralyze ourselves. And so what we ask for is that the Senate and the House pass a national security waiver in the hands of the Secretary of State. I'm not asking for myself. Foreign policy is driven from Foggy Bottom. So if he has the waiver authority and I can go to him and show it's in our best interest, then we get an internal management of this process, but it keeps us from being boxed in by the Russians.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary. Let me turn my attention now to Iran. At your confirmation hearing, Mr. Secretary, you indicated that when America gives her word, we have to live up to it and work with our allies, which was, in my view, confirmation of the strategic needs to stay within the confines of JCPOA. What's your position today, Mr. Secretary?
Senator, I can assure you there has been no decision made on any withdrawal from JCPOA. The discussions are ongoing in the national security staff and those of us who are charged with that responsibility of giving the President advice, and it's going on today as we speak. There are obviously aspects of the JCPOA, of the agreement, that can be improved upon. We're working with our European allies on it at this time, and again, the decision has not been made whether we can repair it enough to stay in it or if the President is going to decide to withdraw from it.
I appreciate that, Mr. Secretary. The issue of repairing it, though, is unlikely to be fully accomplished by May 12th. Is it your position that if there's an ongoing effort to make such fixes to the agreement that we should stay within the bounds? And
yes, sir. We would have to look at what degree of fix we anticipate are achievable, and then put that alongside America's broader interests and decide if it's worthy or not.
thank you. And, Mr. Chairman, General Dunford, you similarly indicated that there would be consequences withdrawing from JCPOA in many dimensions. One would be our allies would be less likely to cooperate with us, countering destabilizing activities in the region, and you seem to indicate a preference for remaining within JCPOA. Is that still your position?
Senator Reid, when I look at it through the military dimension, the thing that I have been bringing to the debate is making sure that whatever we do, we have a framework for dealing with all of the elements of the challenges we face from Iran. So it's the nuclear threat, it's the missile threat, it's the cyber threat, it's the maritime threat, and it's the sponsorship of proxies. So at the end of the day, it'll be the President's decision as to what the framework is for dealing with all those challenges. My role is to try to highlight those challenges and to make sure that whatever decision is made addresses them as effectively as we can.
Thank you, General. Mr. Secretary, there has been an unfortunate escalation of a cycle of violence between Israel and Iran and their proxies in Syria, beginning in February with the shooting down of Iranian drone over Israeli airspace, which is appropriate, and then strikes against targets within Syria, which seem to be Iranian, Hezbollah, cooperative endeavors that could pose a danger to Israel. Is there a significant risk of escalation at this moment that would not only engulf Syria but spread throughout the region?
Complex question. I believe the short answer is yes, Senator. I can see how it might start. I'm not sure when or where. I think that it's very likely in Syria because Iran continues to do its proxy work there through Lebanese Hezbollah there and over into Lebanon. And so I could imagine this sparking something larger.
One other, if I may, just quickly, the Assad regime continues to consolidate its position. One area which is still under the control of rebel forces is the southern border against Jordan. If they move there, which some people indicate they might, would that be another sort of pressure point in terms of not only Jordanian but Israeli counter-reaction?
Yes, Assad's continued presence and his forces' presence, sir, in light of what they've done over several years to their own people. And then when you look at them hosting Lebanese Hezbollah, any kind of position like that along the southern border is a direct threat against Jordan, against Israel, and it's something we're going to have to address. We're trying to do that through the diplomatic process, the UN process. It's referred to as the Geneva process, but to date that has not been availing.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Reed. Senator Wicker.
Mr. Secretary, just a quick follow-up on a question Senator Reed asked. Can you give us any guidance as to when a decision might be made about the JCPOA?
Yes, Senator, I believe it'll be made before the 12th of next month.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, the SHIPS Act makes the 355-ship Navy the official policy of the United States of America. This enacts in statute a requirement that came down to us from the admirals and generals, and not something that we arrived at here at the congressional level. Do you agree that the 355-ship requirement is now the official policy of the United States?
I do, Senator.
And in terms of getting there, the target date was an unacceptable period in the 2050s. Recently, a decision was made to extend the lives of some destroyers. That moves it to the 2030s. What do you need from us, and what are the plans in the Pentagon for moving that date even earlier? Well,
As we try to balance the force, sir, if you gave me all the money in the world, I'd go for it in the next 5 years, of course. Right now, we're trying to balance inside the administration. Yes, sir. But for right now, we're trying to balance solvency and security, because solvency is critical to the long-term national security of our nation. But at the same time, we're asking for this year 3.1% of GDP, and we believe the nation can afford that and perhaps even increase that. That would depend, of course, on the level of taxation you're willing to put in, because we should not be growing the national debt further. But at the same time, what part of that tax base you're going to commit to national defense. I believe we're moving toward a more maritime strategy in terms of our military strategy to defend the country. It's the nature of our time, and so I'd be supportive if the Senate found a way to increase the shipbuilding budget.
Work with us on ideas about getting there, sir. Let me just ask you then my final question. The RAND reports concluded actually some very alarming verbiage, that the United States military would have difficulty deterring and defeating a Russian conventional attack in the Baltics. The committee's previously received testimony that U.S. ground forces are outranged, outgunned, and overmatched. Our own General Scaparrotti, the commander of U.S. European Command, has testified that, quote, the ground force permanently assigned to EUCOM is inadequate to meet the combatant command's directed mission to deter Russia from further aggression. Now, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs just testified that that we still have a competitive advantage over any adversary, and that our strategy is designed to keep that strategy from eroding. So I don't want to scare the American public, and I don't want to alarm our allies. But is General Scaparrotti correct? Is the RAND report correct? Is it a little more alarming than our chairman of the Joint Chiefs just said about an eroding competitive advantage?
Senator, I believe that we can all see the growing threat that Russia has chosen to be. It has chosen to be a strategic competitor. NATO opened the door to a partnership of sorts. I still remember Russian Marines and U.S. Marines training in Camp Lejeune for UN peacekeeping missions back in the late 90s, early 2000s. That is a long, distant memory, as they've chosen to do what they've done in the Ukraine and Crimea with cyber against our elections. I can go on, as you know, and you've seen significant expulsion of diplomats, sanctions put on Russia by this administration. I believe we do have a competitive advantage today. It's important we expand it over the Russians. They have a geographic advantage that my geographic commander is rightly looking at, but looking at it more broadly as we address this, America is more capable than any nation of expanding the competitive space against something like a ground attack into the Baltics. And there's a number of ways, symmetrical and asymmetrical, we can make this a very, very tough problem for the Russians. We do that by, with, and through the NATO alliance, by, with, and through our whole of government effort, everything from Treasury Department to the State Department. So I think you have to look beyond the geography, is my point, Senator Wicker, to get the whole understanding of the situation. I'm not dismissing any of General Scaparotti's concerns, but we have strengths.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Ricker. Senator McCaskill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sometimes I feel like a broken record on contracting, but it is with, I'm going to try to keep my blood pressure down during my questioning today, because today we are issuing a report from the minority staff on the Committee of Homeland Security and Government Affairs looking into another egregious contracting problem at the Pentagon. I would ask that this report, Fast Cars, Easy Money, be entered into the record, Mr. Chairman.
You see for, without objection.
I first would like a commitment from you, General Dunford, that you will read this report in its entirety.
I'll do that, Senator, and I am familiar with the report and with your engagement and what the Army has done as a result of your engagement.
Secretary Mattis, will you read the report, please?
No reservations. I'm a voracious reader of these kinds of things.
I know you are. Secretary Norquist.
Always enjoy reading audit reports, Senator.
Okay. Well, you and I...
You're the only one that could say that.
You and I have that in common. And if the audit reports had been read on a timely basis, we wouldn't have taxpayer money paying for a Bentley, Alfa Romeo, Aston Martin, Porsches, for executives of a subcontractor on the legacy contract in Afghanistan. We wouldn't have the CEO and the COO's wives getting salaries of averaging $190,000 a year with absolutely no evidence of them doing any work. You would know, if you'd read all the audit reports, as my staff has, and asked the questions, that in fact, the subcontractor not only directed the Pentagon towards this contract, they got most of the work under the contract, and that there was involvement in the Pentagon in helping steer this contract to the subcontractor. You would know that they figured out a way to find a contracting vehicle that they wouldn't have to compete. And the insulting thing about this is they found a contracting vehicle that was for R&D, asking for hard science proposals, hard science proposals. In a 150-page solicitation for hard science proposal, the human was mentioned one time, one word, human intelligence. They used that one word to pretzel that proposal into an ongoing mentoring program for Afghan intelligence capabilities in theater. Hundreds and millions of dollars. And audit after audit has said they can't even find any metrics that they made any progress. I know there's criminal investigations going on, but the question I have to ask, as I've asked repeatedly in this committee, is what is wrong with the debarment process? This is the whipped cream and cherry on top of this incredible scandal. They are still a contractor. They are getting taxpayer money as we speak. Why in the world, when you have audit evidence of this kind of egregious, I don't know at what point it becomes criminal or just gross mismanagement by the Pentagon. I don't know at which point it's criminal activity or not. But I do know this, that there is enough evidence in the audit reports, Secretary Norquist and Secretary Mattis and General Dunford, that these people shouldn't be anywhere near one dime of taxpayer money. So I would like somebody to respond to me why in the world we are still doing business with these crooks.
Senator, I won't take issue with a single word you said. The contract was awarded in 2012. The CGAR report that alerted, at least at the secretarial level, was released in 2017. There is the ongoing investigation, and because it may result, will likely result in criminal charges, we can't go into a lot of detail in public because we're not supposed to when something's under an investigation. But there's not a word you just said that I would take issue with.
I really appreciate that, Secretary Mattis. And there's two things I would ask for you and of all of you, and I would hope that I could get answers on those as quickly as possible. And if it has to be in a setting where we can talk about the criminal investigation, one is how quickly they can be debarred, because there's nothing in the law prohibiting you from debarring them right now. There's nothing in the criminal investigation that requires a wait for debarment. So I want to know how quickly they can be debarred. And secondly, I want to know a list of everyone who currently works for the United States military who should have had hands on this and didn't. Whether it's a Corps representative or whether it's somebody at this office that this bizarre contract came out of. Clearly somebody over there said, hey, we can use this and we can get you the money. These guys have burrowed in. They've burrowed in at the Pentagon. I've seen this before. And you guys know it happens. Somebody builds a relationship, and before you know it, hundreds of millions of dollars are flying around, and frankly, nobody's paying close enough attention. Somebody's head's got to roll on this. And I need a list of people that are going to be held accountable for this happening.
I've just got to be careful saying individually before the investigation's done, because that could end up
I understand. I have confidence in you, Secretary Mattis, that you'll get to the bottom of it. But I will tell you, I am not going to shut up about this until somebody is held accountable for people driving Bentleys. Yeah. We're losing soldiers. Families are sacrificing. We're worried about their benefits and their pay. And some jerk is driving a Bentley in the UK on taxpayer money. If it doesn't make everybody upset, then something's wrong with them. So let's get busy on this and figure out whose head needs to roll, because if somebody isn't held accountable for letting this happen, it's going to keep happening.
Senator, 100% with you on this. You'll notice last year when I came up here for confirmation, I talked about business reform. This year, alongside business reform, is accountability. I've learned the lesson since I got there. And that is now right alongside business reform is accountability for every dollar. So we're with you. I wish I'd been here in the job in 2012 is all I can tell you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Senator McCaskill. Senator Cotton.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your appearance here today and for your continued service to our country. Secretary Mattis, I want to return to a few points you made in your opening statement about the budget picture, both the budget levels and certainty. So this Congress passed a two-year budget a couple months ago. We passed a spending bill that implemented the first year of that budget. That means we have one more year on that two-year budget to pass. How important is it to the Department of Defense that the Congress pass a DoD appropriations bill in a timely fashion this summer, as opposed to having a continuing resolution as we approach the end of this fiscal year on September 30th?
Senator Cotton, one of the ways we avoid the situation that Senator McCaskill just brought up is having a methodical approach to reviewing every dollar going out. Obviously, the narrower the window to spend the money, the increased workload during that period. So it's critical. And I think that budget certainty also reverberates into American industry as we try to rearm the country with the modern capability. They cannot do that in their responsibility to their shareholders unless we give them that predictability.
Thank you. Well, since we have the top line number now for FY19, I hope that we'll have the cooperation to pass a DoD appropriations bill this summer in timely fashion, rather than see the filibusters that have occurred in the past. Looking out a little bit further, that two-year budget deal only lasts 2 years. We're now less than 18 months away from FY20, in which case the Budget Control Act caps and potential sequestration return. How important is it to the Department of Defense that we act now to eliminate the prospect hanging over your head that the BCA caps and sequestration may return in October of 2019?
Again, we need that predictability, sir, so that we can actually put a strategy into effect. As was noted in opening comments by the committee, if you don't have a budget that reflects the strategy, it doesn't work. I like quantifying problems to the degree possible. If this were to go into effect, the first cut would be $85 billion in FY20. That means the strategy is not sustainable. The strategy is designed to protect America and our interests. I cannot provide you the same strategy. I would have to go back and rewrite it. There would be reductions in what we are able to do.
Thank you. I want to turn now to a question that Senator Reid raised about the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act and the specific point about a national security waiver. As you mentioned, there are two specific countries, India and Vietnam, that have legacy Russian systems. They might face real challenges going cold turkey, so to speak, under CATSA. So you're suggesting the national security waiver as a way that this Congress can empower soon-to-be Secretary Pompeo to address the concerns that you have with those two countries. Is that right?
That's correct, and there's other countries. Indonesia, for example, is in the same situation, trying to shift to more of our airplanes, our systems, but they've got to do something to keep their legacy military going.
How urgent is it that Congress pass that kind of waiver?
Sir, every day Russia's in a position basically to checkmate us with what they're doing. It's urgent.
Would you recommend that we try to do so in this year's National Defense Authorization Act?
Absolutely.
And there's only so many countries in the world, and only so many of those use Russian legacy systems and are defense partners. Should we just have a list of countries that soon-to-be Secretary Pompeo might want to consider, or is there a certain degree of criteria that we should use instead?
Sir, I would just put in a reporting requirement that we keep the Congress informed every time we exercise. I would not make it where we have to come back to Congress in order to add to it. In the dynamics of today, issues can shift countries very, very quickly, Senator Cotton, as you know, and we want to move when we see the opportunity at the speed of relevance.
Thank you. I want to turn now to the nuclear posture review and an exchange you and I had in a classified setting. Nothing classified about my question or your answer, though. I simply want to have it on the record here. That nuclear posture review did not include a forswearing no first use doctrine, which we have never done in our nuclear history going back to 1945. It also advocates for a new sea-launched cruise missile, which we had as recently as 8 years ago, for a low-yield sea-launched warhead. We have numerous low-yield warheads currently in our inventory. The bottom line, Secretary Mattis, is there any concept, doctrine, or capability in the new nuclear posture review that is novel or inconsistent with 73 years of nuclear doctrine and practice for the United States?
No, sir. It is a continuity of our nuclear deterrent framework that you see, but it's also an adaptation so that that deterrent is fit for anyone who thinks that they've created something that they could then give us the option of either surrender or suicide. We want to make certain the deterrent works against any attempted use of these weapons.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cotton. Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Mattis, General Dunford, and Secretary Norquist for being here and for the work that you do every day for this country. Secretary Mattis, the National Defense Strategy de-emphasizes the importance of counterterrorism and counterinsurgency operations. There have been, however, a number of reports lately that have suggested that we are actually expanding our special operations footprint in Africa. Report over the weekend about the drone base that's being built in Niger. Can you talk about what the mission, the long-term mission of our troops in Niger is, and how we're going to measure the success in accomplishing this mission? I think it's particularly timely given that the report on the deaths of our 4 servicemen in Niger is coming out this week.
While at the same time we are de-emphasizing irregular warfare, counterinsurgency as the primary challenge to us as the realities of other nations that are choosing to be strategic competitors raise their game. At the same time, as we pointed out, the paradox of war is the enemy always moves against your weak area. So in terms of counterinsurgency in particular, we are going to do this fight by, with, and through allies because most of the time they know the terrain better. It's an intensely, I would call it, fight among innocent people in many cases. It's a fight where cultural understanding is important. Our special forces are ideally suited for that sort of thing, working with foreign forces for what we call foreign internal defense. The last administration in Africa began the airfield construction. And you need to understand here that had the French not moved when they did in Mali, if they had waited, as President Hollande put it in those days, if they wait for the international community, Mali is going to fall. So they moved quickly in, and since that time, the last administration and this administration, by, with, and through our allies, support the French leadership. They have over 4,000 troops there. The number we have there has grown. Many of them are construction troops that are constructing the airfield. They will come out when that construction is done, and we will continue to support the French leadership of the African nations that are fighting Boko Haram, Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb, forces like that, and what we call the Trans-Sahel.
And so do you see us continuing to expand the footprint in Africa and sending more troops there?
I do not see any significant increase. There could be temporary increases as we work with a counterterrorism force in one of the countries that need to be brought up to a higher level of capability because the enemy is trying to move out of the Trans-Sahel into their area. As you know, it's a transnational enemy, so we have to be able to react. But I don't see a significant upgrade. Again, it's by, with, and through allies. That is not something that calls for large numbers of U.S. troops. The French, for example, are providing by far the bulk of the troops in that part of the world.
I understand that NATO is not going to rule out invoking Article 5 of its charter should one or more member nations find themselves under a serious cyber attack. Can you clarify under what circumstances Article 5 might be invoked in the case of a cyber attack?
Well, it would be a hypothetical, as you understand, Senator, but I think that as we come to grips with cyber, if they get to the point of having a massive attack with cyber, I mean, one that threatens life, that shuts off the power to hospitals and communities in the middle of winter, obviously that would be a significant, attack. But it would have to be weighed against all the other things that could be done too. Even then, it doesn't mean the only response is military. There might be better economic responses to whoever did it. As you know, attribution is always a challenge in these things. So we'd have to make sure we're firing on the right target, whether it be with economic sanctions, with military responses, or whatever it took. But it would be something, I think, to go into the Article 5 arena, it would have to be very significant.
Thank you. There have been a number of comments made by the President in the last month or so about withdrawing troops from Syria. Mm-hmm. If we withdraw our troops from Syria now, will we have finished the fight against ISIS?
Yeah. Right now, Senator, we are not withdrawing. You'll see a re-energized effort against the Middle Euphrates River Valley in the days ahead, and against the rest of the caliphate, the geographic caliphate. You'll see increased operations on the Iraq side of the border, and the French have just reinforced us in Syria with special forces here in the last 2 weeks, and this is an ongoing fight right now.
So we need to stay there in order to finish the fight against ISIS.
We're there with the other 70, I think it's 73 nations and international organizations, NATO, Arab League, Interpol, plus 70 of the most important nations on earth in terms of capability. We're continuing the fight. We're going to expand it and bring in more regional support is probably the biggest shift we're making right now.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Chair.
Senator Shaheen. Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and gentlemen, thank you for your exceptional service. I think it gives us a lot of confidence on some of the big challenges we have before us. In particular, I want to commend you, Mr. Secretary, General Dunford, on the National Defense Strategy. As you probably see here from Senator Reid's comments and others, there's a strong bipartisan support for that document. I think that's a really important achievement, and thank you for that. In particular, the emphasis on allies in the document, in the National Security Strategy document, is very important. It's certainly, as you've mentioned time and time again, Mr. Secretary, one of our most important strategic advantages. We're an ally-rich nation, and most of our adversaries or potential adversaries are ally-poor. Are we in Congress doing enough, and is the Trump administration doing enough to deepen our current alliances and expand them, as you so frequently talk about? And what more can we do if we're not?
Right. The most immediate effort is what Senator Cotton brought up here about the CATSA and getting a national security waiver so that we can embrace new allies or partners when they're ready, basically, to see the way forward alongside us. That would be a critical enabler. Are we doing enough? Some journalist who didn't have a very rich nightlife called and told me that I used the word allies 124 times in the National Defense Strategy.
We noticed.
Yes, sir. It's not subtle. It's not meant to be subtle. We're going to do, whether it be the fighting in Africa by, with, and through them, I think anything you can do to make it an open door for allies. And I realize sometimes those allies don't share all of our values, but if they're security allies, if they're allied with us on security, and if you look at our record over many years of creating democracies and reinforcing democratic impulses, when our troops are engaged, I need only point to South Korea and the very vibrant democracy they are today, yet there was at one time a move to keep us away from South Korea, to pull us out of South Korea because there was a dictatorship. I think we've got to be willing to work with imperfect allies while being never reticent about what our values are and what we stand for. And your support in that area would be very helpful, Senator.
Thank you. Let me turn. You have some difficult, challenging decisions ahead of you. The whole administration does on the JCPOA, North Korea. Let me just mention a few things to consider, and if you'd like to comment on them. You know, Senator Reid mentioned a number of things about America giving her word. There was a number of us who thought this was such an important document that should have come to the Senate as a treaty. Didn't come that way. And interestingly, a bipartisan majority of U.S. senators actually did not approve of the JCPOA. A bipartisan majority of House members did not approve of the JCPOA. As a matter of fact, it's the first time in U.S. history that an agreement of this magnitude was approved, quote unquote, by the Congress by a partisan minority of senators and House members. So I think it's important to caveat the idea of America's credibility when this body, our credibility is not on the line. Similarly, everybody talks about our allies and how important it is to our allies. But as you know, General, or Mr. Secretary, a lot of our key allies, Israel, Gulf Arab nations, were also not supportive. And let me mention one other thing that I know you two in particular have some, unfortunately, firsthand experience with. The issue of what degree we can trust the Iranian leadership, I think, should also be considered. Chairman Dempsey was here 2 years ago, I believe, and testified, I forgot the exact number, but the sophisticated IEDs that were supplied by Iraqi Shia militia, to Iraqi Shia militias by the Iranians killed or wounded over 2,000 American troops in Iraq. You gentlemen were witness to this carnage during your military service. Have senior Iranian leaders ever admitted this? And can we trust a country that doesn't admit this and was responsible for the deaths of so many of our finest young men and women that they've never admitted? Can you just, I know I've thrown a lot of things, allies, credibility, trust, but they're all things that we think are very important to consider, and I don't think get the attention they deserve when the JCPOA is being re-examined?
Right. Well, we all recognize the JCPOA was an imperfect arms control agreement.
And was not supported by the Congress.
Yes, sir. I understand, Senator. And I think that their use of denial and deception to hide their nuclear weapons program, not their nuclear program, their nuclear weapons program over many years, have them in a position of being suspect. I've read it now 3 times, all 156 pages or whatever it is, including, since I got into this job, I was able to read the classified, the short classified protocol. And I will say that it is written almost with an assumption that Iran would try to cheat. So the verification, what is in there, is actually pretty robust as far as our intrusive ability to get in, IAEA to get in, that sort of thing. Whether or not that is sufficient, I think is a valid question. I also recognize that some people point out that this could impact on the North Korea negotiations, but I would say in that case, in light of Kim's family and himself breaking every international treaty, every agreement they've ever made, whether it be with the Republic of Korea or with the United States, I'm less concerned with that ripple effect right now. I think we need to focus on what is in the best interest of Middle East stability and the threat that Iran poses, as the chairman pointed out, with this nuclear program, if it does not get extended and maintain the verification, intrusive verification that we need, but also look at what they're doing with their support for terrorism from Bahrain to Yemen, from Syria to Lebanon, and elsewhere, their maritime threat, their cyber threat. We've got to look at all these things, sir, as a whole, but at the same time, focus on this imperfect arms control agreement and determine if that's in our best interest.
Trust factor?
I think trust but verify would be an exaggeration. I think it's distrust and verify.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan. Senator Gillibrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Dunford, your fellow chiefs have told me that they are not aware of any instances of issues with unit cohesion, morale, and discipline as a result of open transgender service. Have you heard of any such incidents?
Senator, thanks. I wouldn't typically hear of individual cases of cohesion or discipline issues, and maybe just a comment on transgender. For me, the issue with transgender has never been about cohesion or discipline anyway. It was just about any individual, regardless of circumstances, being able to meet the physical and mental qualifications of being worldwide deployable. So if an individual is serving without accommodation, then I don't think I'd expect to see discipline or cohesion issues in that unit.
During our last discussion on this topic, you said that you would treat all service members, including transgender service members, with dignity and respect. The recommendations on transgender service and the accompanying panel report were released as part of the DOJ's filing on Friday night. Service members found out in the news that the department had submitted a report that cast aspersions on their fitness to serve, implied they could harm the lethality of the force, and left their futures in the military up in air. Do you think this rollout accords transgender service members with the dignity and respect they deserve?
Senator, one thing we've tried to clarify for our men and women that are currently serving is that, and I can't talk about any changes in the policy, but one thing that didn't change was the status of the men and women that are currently serving.
That's not what the impression the report leaves. Do you know whether this has created anxiety among these troops? Have you met with any transgender troops given this report?
I have not since the report was released, Senator.
I recommend that you do so you are more informed. Secretary Mattis, one of the things that struck me about your panel's report was its claim that, quote, unlike past reviews, the panel's analysis was informed by the department's own data and experience obtained since the Carter policy took effect. That's why I've been asking the chiefs about unit cohesion. In fact, General Milley put it, with regard to the Army, as precisely 0 instances of units with less unit cohesion, morale, and discipline. I'm very concerned about this report because it says that there is, quote, scientific uncertainty surrounding the efficacy of transition-related treatments for gender dysphoria, yet the American Medical, Psychological, and Psychiatric Associations have all said the report misrepresents what is the scientific consensus when it comes to gender dysphoria and transition. In fact, despite the report's stated concerns about deployability of transgender service members because of gender dysphoria or associated medical care, a report being issued today by the Palm Center here, which I'm going to give to you so you can read in full, says that, quote, out of 994 service members diagnosed with gender dysphoria in 2016 and the first half of 2017, 40% deployed in support of Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation Iraqi Freedom, or Operation New Dawn, and only one had an issue during that deployment. It appears that this report that your department has issued is not based on the department's data or science, but rather, quote, potential risks that the authors cannot back up. And in fact, this seems to me to be the same uninformed and unfounded concerns that led to the opposition of repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell, integrating women into the military, integrating African Americans into the military. And I think you need to do a lot more work on this topic to inform yourselves. What is so different about transgender service that makes you think that through the data and medical science don't justify it, transgender service will harm the readiness and lethality of our force?
Well, Senator, I regret that the way you characterize it. I would remind you that when I came into this job, I said I don't come in with a preordained or agenda to change something. I'm in to carry 3 lines of effort forward. One of them was to create a more lethal military, and I believe that service in the military is a touchstone for patriotic Americans. The military protects all Americans' freedom and liberty to live as they choose, and we're proud of that. 71% of 18 to 24-year-old men and women in this country do not qualify for medical, legal, behavioral, intellectual reasons to enlist as a private in the U.S. Army, 71%. In this case, I was meeting with the service chiefs and the chairman, but not as the joint chiefs, as service chiefs last spring, and they were asking me questions because we were coming up on the advent of the induction of transgender. And they want to know how they were going to deal with certain issues about basic training, about deployability. And I said, didn't you get all this when the policy came out? The Carter policy, we call it. They said no, and I said, well, did you have input? They said no, they did not. So I convened that panel. That panel was made up of combat veterans, the vice chiefs of the services, and the undersecretaries, and they called together transgender troops. They brought in commanders of transgender troops, and they brought in and listened to civilian and military medical experts who have provided care for transgenders both in the military and outside.
Will you please?
And I gave my 44-page advice. I'd like to have it entered, Chairman, for the record.
And a list of all experts
very,
you consulted, please.
Pardon?
I would like a list of all the experts, medical experts that were consulted for that report, please.
Okay. Right now, this is under litigation. I'll see what I can provide, or when I can provide it, I'll do that, Senator. But at the same time, basically, my responsibility is to give the best advice I can for making a lethal force. And I think that right now the Carter policy is still in effect, and we have the 4 cases being litigated. Why these issues like this would not come to service chief level, generally, unless it was a very, very, I would call it newsworthy situation. And reason is that under the Carter policy, the reporting is opaque. We cannot report that a problem emanated from a transgender. We cannot, under the Carter policy, do that. So the question you've asked the service chiefs and the chairman are ones that right now the Carter policy prohibited that very information from coming up because it's private information, and it's specifically called out in his policy statement. So it's impossible for them to have responded to you. And I would just say that right now we look at medical conditions. If gender dysphoria has anxiety or it has some kind of depression, we don't allow anyone in with that. I would have to make a special category that said you can have these disqualifying factors only if you're transgender, and then we can bring you in. I think you understand why we have not chosen to do that.
Thank you. Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Mattis, in last year's NDAA, Congress required the department to evaluate whether existing cruise missile systems could be converted into ground-launched version as part of our response to Russia's violation to the INF Treaty. The department's response, which was a letter from Undersecretary Lord, was sent to the committee 2 weeks ago. And it states that DoD is in the early stages of identifying the system requirements and is therefore unable to conduct an assessment at this time. I know the department is moving forward on a broader effort beyond just a ground-launched cruise missile, but I am concerned about the urgency of our response because, as we both know, we can spend the next 3 years defining requirements and analyzing alternatives and not conduct any actual research and development. So I would just ask, what is your expected timeline for moving forward on this, and have you set any kind of internal goals to ensure that we don't spend years in this preliminary stage?
Right. It's a very applicable question. What we are doing right now, as you know, we once had a sea-launched cruise missile, nuclear cruise missile. We took those off after the Berlin Wall and the years afterwards off the Navy ships. So by going back to a weapon that we had before, there's a fair amount of already sunk technology costs that we won't have to redo, won't have to come back up and ask for again. I need to get back to you on the specific timeline, but remember what we're trying to do here, Senator, is to put our diplomats in the strongest position to force the Russians back into compliance. I've been personally engaged with a Russian, high-ranking Russian on this issue, and I would just tell you that the NATO allies are also increasingly taking this message to Moscow. But we are going forward with this, and I'll have to get back to you with a timeline. It's a very good question. I don't have the answer, but I'll get it.
I really appreciate your sense of urgency because, as we all know, the Russians were in violation 4 years ago on that treaty, and I agree with you, and obviously Congress agrees with you as well, that a response is necessary. The administration has also stepped forward on that. Mm-hmm. So thank you. Also, Russia continues to expand the scope of its malign activities in Syria. It's building up installations, it's aiding the regime, it's expanding its footprint in the country. And recent reports have also suggested that Russian forces are jamming U.S. unmanned aerial vehicles. They're conducting electronic warfare operations against the EC-130 aircraft. Are the Russian forces actively harassing American forces in Syria? And what do you believe is an appropriate response if you agree that they are?
I cannot target the responsibility to the Russians right now. As you know, it's a crowded battlefield, and it's also got Iranians there, and of course the regime forces as well. But you notice as we go forward with we've so far sanctioned 189 individuals in Russia, and we're looking at those who have, we've also, as you know, thrown 60 of their diplomats out, and economic sanctions are going to be obviously looked at for future violations as well. So we have an asymmetric way, an indirect way of going back after them and making them pay. Right now in Syria, we have an odd and somewhat open and never interrupted deconfliction communication line that has worked pretty well to make certain we don't run afoul of one another's forces or one another's operations. They are not coordinated. They're deconflicted in either time or space, mostly in space. The river, for example, the Euphrates, divides our activities in some cases.
Did you use that deconflicted line in communication with the Russians when it was reported in February that there were large numbers of Russian irregular forces that had attacked U.S. forces?
It was used, Senator. The Russian High Command in Syria assured us was not their people, and my direction to the chairman was for the force then was to be annihilated, and
Thank
it
you,
was.
sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Fisher. Senator Heinrich.
Thank you, Chairman.